Today we're going to talk about the super duper exciting world of rebuilding a hydro gear brand, hydrostatic transmission. This one is in a Cub Cadet RZT 50. If you do not have the Cub Cadet, as long as you have the hydro gear 2100 or 2200 EZT, this video will apply to you. So you might be scratching your head asking yourself why you should, listen to an idiot tell you how to do this, and well, I'm going to tell you why. So I did this for the first time 3 weeks ago, so I'm definitely no expert. As a matter of fact, you probably will not find any experts online talking about this, showing a video on this, because lawnmower repair shops, actually, most of them say that these transmissions are not serviceable. And I believe what they mean by not serviceable is that it takes a lot of time to work on these things and rebuild them. The project will take you probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 total hours, and a brand new one costs $1,200. And so I think by the time you get into the parts and you get into the labor involved, you're probably inching up close to that anyway at a repair shop. So yes, they are serviceable. So I'm going to show you a lot of tips, a lot of tricks to help save you some time, help save you some money, even though you're going to need to spend some money, and maybe more importantly, help save you quite a bit of frustration as you work your way through really what is in effect a series of puzzles that you have to kind of solve. I'm going to go through all the tools that you're going to need, or so there's some that you need and some that I would simply recommend. I'm going to show you a couple of websites that I think you're going to find very helpful. I'm going to go through the most likely parts that you're going to need as well. To rebuild this transmission, you're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of, we'll call it $200 to $400 range, something like that. It really depends on if you need to go out and buy a bunch of tools that can start making the cost go up quite a bit. Parts alone will probably cost you maybe just south of $200. So I'm assuming you're checking out this video because you were probably having similar issues as I was with your lawnmower, which seems like for the first 30, maybe 45 minutes that it's going okay. And then either sort of slowly or rapidly you notice a decline in power on one side. And there's a pretty common problem as to what causes that. And that is this, what we call the center section right here. I don't know if you can see that in this area here. Well, basically this whole piece is scratched up. If you can't see it, trust me, it's pretty well scratched and scored. And there's a pump that goes up against that can also get scratched and scored and scarred. So what ends up happening is as the transmission is actually heating up and these things get really hot, it heats the fluid up inside the transmission, and the fluid is simply 20W50 motor oil. And as that gets heated up, it gets thinner. And once that gets thinner and meets up with the scratching and the scoring, that's when you start to lose power. So most likely that's what's happening with your unit. It is primarily the center section that needs replaced. The pump that I was talking about can either be replaced or you can potentially sand out the scratches in that. Anyway, we'll go through that. So looking to have a little bit of fun in this video. I would say that I'm going to be a bit more wordy than you may like. However, for those of you who aren't as mechanically inclined, I think you'll find it very helpful. For those of you who are, maybe you'll find some of the stuff a little bit junior. If you're more of an ignoramus type and can't really figure out how to put gas in the lawnmower, then yeah, I might suggest you have somebody else try to do this. So anyway, we're going to get into this in just a little bit. Hopefully we can have some fun. And oh, ladies, my eyes are up here. Stop looking at the guns. Yeah, creepy. Anyway, hopefully we're going to have a little bit of fun, and I hope to save you lots of time, money, and frustration as we work through this. Last piece of this is that I did this repair initially 3 weeks ago, and when I went into that repair, I was 27 years old. When I came out of that repair 6 days later, I was still 27 years old, but this is what I was left with right here. Kind of the look of that guy who played Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi when they did the worst cinematic reveal in history and removed his mask. So anyway, all right, so we're going to get into this, hopefully have a little bit of fun, and I think you're going to learn some stuff as well. All right, so I'm going to go over all the different tools that you're going to need to complete this project and maintain as much sanity as you possibly can. Some of them I would say are required, others are more just of a recommendation that I found extremely helpful. You will also find a list of the quote required tools on the Hydro Gear website under the transaxle repair manual. So I've got a pair of jack stands there, $8 a piece, pretty cheap, from Walmart, and a little hydraulic lift, whatever you need to get the back of the lawnmower and the tires up off the ground in a safe manner. Then I would recommend that you get some either shop rags or t-shirts. Those work much better than paper towels. Paper towels leave little bits of paper towel behind, especially as you're kind of wiping out around the edge of the unit and a little bit on the inside of the unit. You do not want to get anything inside the unit. This air wrench I found to be extremely helpful. There was one bolt on a pulley that I could not get off without that. I also used that to get a few other bolts and screws off because I was afraid I might strip the heads on those. So if you have a friend that has one, borrow theirs, whatever that was. This is a $60 one, about 60 bucks from Walmart. It's fairly cheap, but it does the job. Also, you need obviously the air compressor to go with that. I have two different types of torque wrenches. One torques to inch-pounds, one torques to pound-feet. And the reason I have two of those is because some of these bolts around here, these screws around the casing, do require you to torque them down to 105 to 155 inch-pounds, which is about 9 to 12 foot-pounds or pound-feet. And oftentimes these heavy-duty foot-pound torque wrenches do not torque down that low. I also have a breaker bar here, which came in extremely handy. You could probably also just use a long socket wrench, or put a pipe over a shorter socket wrench, but you're going to need something to get some leverage on some of these bolts, otherwise you're going to struggle to get them off. A couple of them you probably won't be able to get off without some sort of breaker bar style tool. A pair of snap ring pliers. This is a cheap set, cheaply made, but it does the job. They're a little bit weak, about $7 to $8 off of Amazon. They do have interchangeable heads, which can come in a little bit handy. If you're just looking to use these pliers for this job, this will do it for you. But if you need something it's a bit stronger and whatnot to use in the future, then you may want to think about investing a little bit more cash in that. A set of Allen keys or hex keys. I actually use the socket wrench one with the air wrench. That comes in very handy. A pair of vice grips, a little razor blade, which isn't necessary, but I'll show you what I found to be very helpful with that. A set of deep socket wrenches as well. There are some nuts that you will not be able to get off because the bolt is sticking out too far through the nut, and a regular socket will not be able to fit over top of that, so you're going to need some deep sockets. I also have this star bit. I think it's a number 20. Again, it's listed on the Hydro Gear website which one you're going to need. I use the socket style because, again, that comes in very handy to get off the one star screw that can be sort of stuck there. This Permatex Ultra Black gasket, it is high heat, maximum oil resistant. Some random wrenches, a regular socket set, some various screwdrivers to help pry some things up, a pair of pliers that can come in a little bit handy. One thing you definitely won't see on the Hydro Gear website is a tool, I believe is a hammer. I'll show you the one thing that I use that for. A Sharpie and a lug wrench. You could probably get away with, again, using a breaker bar or a long handled socket to get the lug nuts off and back on the tire of the unit, but I found the lug wrench to be very handy. Then we've got this pump here, again about $7 off of Amazon. That's to pump some motor oil into the transmission itself after you've installed the unit and purged it. You'll need 1.75 quarts, or basically 2 bottles of 20W50 motor oil. That is actually what goes into the transmission, not transmission fluid. Get your can of brake clean. You might find some of that penetrating oil to be helpful to get some of those stubborn bolts off and nuts off. And also may find that you will need 320 and 620 grit sandpaper, wet or dry sandpaper, to do some sanding of some stuff. And most importantly would be the bottle of rum there. No, I'm really not trying to promote the consumption of alcohol. No alcohol was consumed during the filming of this process, and if you're underage, then I would recommend maybe some lemonade or Hawaiian punch instead. All right, once you have the cutting deck off, there are 2 cotter pins you're going to need to remove. This one right here is tough to see. Right here. That's for the, I believe that's the parking brake linkage. You just pull the cotter pin out. No big deal. Okay, so here's that second cotter pin I had mentioned earlier. Right there. This is the arm for the transmission release right here. There's one on each side, right and left. Obviously, you only have to do the side that you're working on. So you just want to remove that cotter pin right here, right there. Okay, once you have that cotter pin removed, as you can see, my transmission control arm is swinging there. Next thing you need to do is remove the control arm linkage piece right here. Now, on some of the instructions, it said that this is actually held together with a cotter pin. I'm not finding that to be the case. Obviously, this is a bolt that you need to take off to remove the arm lever control from the transmission itself. Okay, something that may seem like an easy task, should be, but can run into some issues with this. When you're taking off the tire, you want to remove those 4 lug nuts there, but not this one here in the middle. You just leave that right where it is. If you once you get the lug nuts off, if you're having a hard time removing the actual tire, just give it a good whack and it'll come loose. There's nothing else you need to remove on that, just those 4 lug nuts there. Now here's another challenging part to this, is this spring for the drive belt that you need to remove. I suggest actually removing it before you jack up the lawnmower on some jack stands. That way you won't have to worry about any shifting as you're trying to pull that thing off. There are a couple ways you can do that. You can either do that, just kind of pull the spring by hand, or I will show you another little trick using a piece of wire that makes it a little bit easier to get that thing off and back on, by the way, because it's very difficult. Okay, so that hole right there, right by the back tire, what you want to do to remove that drive belt spring is get about, I don't know, 12 to 14 inches of wire, twist it together, and what you're going to do is stick the wire through that hole, hook it onto the end of the spring, then get a pair of pliers and basically just pull on the wire. It'll release the tension on the spring. Alright, so basically there's what it looks like. You run the wire through that hole, hook it around the end of the spring, and then just pull on the pair of pliers. Initially I said, you might want to do that before you jack up the back of your lawnmower, but it wasn't a problem. Like, I just pulled on it, not an issue. It didn't slide, it didn't move at all. So, whatever. Before or after you remove the tire, you just need to make sure you get that drive belt off. You're going to have to remove that spring. So there's a great trick on how to do that. It took me all of 3 seconds once I had the wire all rigged up. All right, so the next thing, once the linkage arm is loosened up, we need to remove these rods right here that basically they stabilize the right and left side transaxles. There's actually two of them, one further over here. Now these are kind of odd because, as you can tell, like it's not like it's a nut or anything like that. On the other side there is just a standard nut that you have to loosen up, but what you have to do is you have to find something. What I use is a pair of vice grips. So here's my setup to remove these axle rods, just a pair of vice grips there and a block of wood. And then on the other side, obviously, we've got the wrench. Now, you should use a long-handled wrench. It'll just make it a little bit easier to work with. All right, now that the axle rods are off, next thing you need to do is remove the drive belt. Right there, not very difficult. You want to loosen tension with the spring already removed there. Loosen tension on this pulley here. Just kind of pull it back. And then this right here, basically you can just slip it off and over top. Slip it off and over top of the pulley. You just need to make sure you get that drive belt off before you begin to remove the actual transmission itself. Now with the drive belt off, next thing we need to do is remove three screws. There are three screws that are holding the transaxle on, and one of them is right there, and then you have the other two right here. So I'm going to remove the front one first. That way these two will give more support. The other thing you might want to do, because these things do have some weight to them, is maybe stack a few blocks of wood underneath, just so the thing doesn't drop down on the ground while you're doing this. All right, well, there's the transaxle / transmission once removed. To this point, not real difficult, as long as you have all your tools, know what you need. Probably about an hour into this project, and a couple more things we're going to do before we actually get into cracking this bad boy open. We're going to remove the transmission linkage, the control linkage here, and I'll show you how to do that. We're also going to remove, this is basically the brake unit. Pretty easy to get that off. And then we're going to clean the outside up. You just don't want any of that nasty dirt and grease and grass to get in. All right, believe it or not, this will be one of your most important tools. That Sharpie right there, and that piece of cardboard. So here's another tip, trick to help things go a little smoother for you and maintain your sanity. So what you want to do is, as you start taking these pieces off, and there will be a lot of them, you want to put them on the cardboard and then label them underneath, pretty much top left to bottom right. And when I did this the first time, I was drawing arrows to show what part went to what part. The other important thing is you might want to consider taking lots and lots of photos of the pieces as you're working on them, just to make sure that you can remember how to put them back together. Again, the diagrams on the HydroGear website will certainly help with that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is remove the all the gizmos and gadgets that go to the brakes, and basically it's just a few things. You're going to need to remove the spring here, which is no big whoop, like that. That little nut there I think can stay in. Remove this clip right here, and then also remove this this nut right here. Again, not real difficult to do this. Easy peasy. Little washer there. And as you might be able to see, this cardboard that I've got this on is actually what I'd referred to earlier in terms of labeling all your pieces. And this is the one that I used for when I had done this a few weeks ago. And then the other thing here is to remove this clip. It snaps out like that. Right here. And it just slides off there. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is remove this spring here. Can be a little tricky, but not too crazy. Maybe. There we go. And hopefully you saw that my elbow wasn't in the way. Next I'm going to do is remove this with the hex key. Pretty simple. Again, much easier with the socket wrench. Okay. Just leave that in there a little bit for now. Next thing I'm going to do is this starboard screw here. There. There we go. See, that came out easy, not stripping the bit. All right, what I'm gonna do is remove all the little gadgets in here. There are a couple of washers and screws and some of these plates. All right, this next part is where this air wrench comes in really handy, and it's to remove this bolt from this pulley. Obviously the pulley spins, you need to have something that's going to take that thing off and try to keep that thing from spinning. So what I have here is an old belt. You might be able to use a piece of rope, piece of rubber, whatever the case may be. I'm going to wrap that around and then clamp it together with this to try to keep it from spinning. Put a better clamp on that. More. Maybe there. And then hit this bad boy in reverse. And there we go. All right, so here's my unit that says clean as I have the patience to clean. Just want to make sure you get decrease the chance of having any particles go into the inside casing once you have that removed, because that's what's going to gum things up and cause scratches on your center section piece and cause you to have a bad day. So next thing we need to do is remove the cap here for the oil. Basically just an Allen key. The one that was on here before, this is a new one. I just replaced it just because I'm dumb and felt like I needed a part for it. The one that was on here was another rough one to try to get off. I could not get it off with this piece. So if you're having the same issue, again, I would recommend getting an Allen key socket bit to do that. Maybe a breaker bar or probably just the socket wrench itself will work. So once you have this bad boy removed, then basically all you need to do is drain the oil by turning this thing upside down. First time I did this, very successful. Just kind of turned it upside down in this bucket and it stayed there on its own without any issues. I'm going to let that sit overnight. Now, you don't have to let it sit overnight. Just try to drain everything out that you possibly can. Maybe you enjoy getting your fingers all greasy and lubed up and all that kind of thing. Who am I to judge? But I think I've had enough for the day, and I'm going to let this thing drain overnight. Let's see if I can get this thing to work just by turning it over. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there it is. Fairly stable. I'm going to stick it up there. There we go. And there you have it. Just one other thing, guys. Over here, you can see I've started my parts list and where everything goes. So again, I recommend doing that. If you haven't done that yet, I recommend doing it now, just to keep yourself straight. Okay, now that all the oil is drained out, or most of the oil is drained out, we're going to get into opening this bad boy up. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you another little tip or trick to kind of make this a little bit easier. So in order to get this casing off right here, you need to stand this bad boy up. Problem is, obviously, that it's not even. It's not going to stand up. The transaxle itself will actually kind of pop in and out once you take this casing off as well. So what I found to work for me, I've seen some others do some fancy things with it, is actually get a block of wood and put it just under the casing. Obviously, you have to cut it to length. Put it just under the casing there. It stands up pretty solid. And then, just a screw with a washer here through the through the frame of the casing. And don't make it too tight. Anyway, that's what I found worked for me the first time I did this throughout the entire process. This was sufficient, even when this transaxle kind of moved around once this casing was off. Okay, so I've removed all my screws for the casing at the top there. And it's basically at this point forward where you're going to find this project to be all sorts of fun. I say sarcastically. At this point forward, this is where you're going to start running into, again, lots of puzzles to solve. Hopefully I can help you through that. The next thing that we need to do is separate the casing halves. And some very important things with this. On either side of the casing, Hydro Gear has put these pry spots where you'll see a bit more of a gap between the casings. Again, there's one on either side. This one is right here, and you want to make sure that you just keep your screwdriver or whatever you're using to try to pry this off in those pry spots. If you start going around here and around here where there aren't pry spots, then you're going to damage your casing. Then you're going to need new casing, and that's going to cost you several $100s. So again, make sure you're focusing only on these pry spots. This is going to take some time. It's going to take some patience. I'm going to eventually, as you kind of start working this thing, I started prying kind of back and forth like this. You'll get a little bit of a gap you'll see starting to be created on either side. So what I did then was I used a razor blade and kind of gently went around the seam, not getting this too far in because you don't want to knock any of that gasket sealant into the unit. Kind of went around the seam a little bit where I could, where it fit in, and then just continued to kind of pry back and forth on either side. The gap gets bigger and you'll kind of hear it start to kind of make that sucking noise, and eventually you can just pull it off. So this is where I went wrong on my first rebuild, and it was with this gasket sealant that it's not really a gasket sealant, it's a liquid gasket that I had put around here. I don't believe I used enough of it. You can tell that there are some spots where there's not really much gasket sealant there, so the unit was leaking. So eventually what you're going to need to do, whether that's now or later on in the process, is clean out both of these sides of the gasket and get all that gasket sealant off. I'll kind of show you some things that I did to make sure I didn't get gasket sealant inside the unit when I cleaned this end at some point throughout. All right, start taking some of these pieces and parts off of here. So we've got this middle gear. I think that might be called the transfer gear. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Got a little washer on there. Then you have the gear head itself. Then you have another little gear here. And the shaft. Stick that on there. And underneath that is another little washer. So basically the washer goes on first. All right, so that's the middle gear. This is actually your transaxle gear. You don't want to do anything with that. You don't need to mess with that. You start messing with that and you get into some stuff that you don't really need to get into and have sadness at that point. All right, so I'm going to start removing some more parts from this, and if that pulls out, not an issue there. A little washer on top and washer underneath. All right, so to make the removal of this a little bit easier, I just turned the unit over. I did drain out some of the oil because there's still going to be quite a bit of oil in here if you let it drain overnight. So just drained out some of the oil, and this little retaining clip right here that does should come with the seal kit. I had a hard time kind of getting that off from this angle, so I just kind of pried up some of these little grooves here, and then it easily comes off like such. And then this is the lever itself. I'm going to make another little notch
notch here. Mark where that thing goes. And then, ooh, that's quite a bit of dirt in there. That ain't cool. There's a little retaining clip in here that you need to get out. Let's see. Yeah, little retaining clip in there. Retaining pliers. There we go. Retaining clip off. And then this shaft will just pull right out, even though there's a retaining clip on that end as well. Voila. Now there's some dirt in there. I want to make sure I don't get any dirt inside the unit. Clean that out a little bit. Good times, fun and exciting. And then there's this shaft right here, or the cover for the shaft. And again, retaining pliers. Away we go. And that one's out. Again, I believe this comes with the seal kit as well. And there you have it. I'm going to leave this seal in for now. I need to verify that I have a replacement. I'm going to take this seal out again. It's jacked up. So, there was a reason I had taken this out earlier, and then you may have noticed that it's back in again. I did put it back in because there's some stuff going on inside here that I didn't want to have kind of fall out, and I want to show you what those things are, because you have to be very careful. There's a few pieces and springs and clips and things like that in here. Another very important piece with this is, this will save you some headaches. Make sure that you remove these shafts, this one and this one, before you loosen up these bolts for the center section. It's really weird, because if you loosen up these bolts or take these bolts out before you remove these shafts, it actually seizes up and you can't get the shaft out. So, okay, another little tip, trick, hint, whatever the case may be. Let me pull this bad boy up here. I'll show you this. So, there. This shaft and the bearing unit that you see in there, it's kind of one piece. I'll put it to you this way. You do not have to remove the bearing to get the shaft out. There is a tiny little wire retaining clip there that you need to remove in order to get the ball bearing unit out. However, you do not need to remove the ball bearing unit. That will cause you lots and lots of frustration to try to have to do that and then to put a new one on. I basically destroyed my first one because the shaft would not come out. And the reason the shaft would not come out right here is because I had removed those center section bolts first, and then it seized up the shaft. So keep the bolts in on the center section first, and then this thing just simply pops out like that. Little washer on top, and there's some springs and some washers inside there. Not sure if you can see that, but I'll go ahead and grab those. Little washer there on top, little spring here, just like that. So I'm just going to put all that back together as one piece. Now this should actually just kind of pull out and it's in there. So let me just make sure that this bad boy is going to slide out. Here we go. Oh, it's fun and exciting. Oh, that's under some pressure. Good times. Oh, look at that. Isn't it a beaut? Well, check this out. It's got those, what is that, 7, 8 little pistons in there that are all sort of spring loaded. And it's got a ball bearing thrust in here. All right, so then the only other piece that I need to get out of this thing is the center section, and I'm going to do that with a breaker bar because this is under some foot-pounds, or as I understand it, pound-feet is the correct terminology. All right, done got me my breaker bar right here. I'll turn this bad boy on its side. And here we go. Let's see what we can get from this. You heard that snap, huh? That's got some torque to it. Same with that one. The center section bolts are really just one of a few pieces that I actually torque down to what Hydro Gear recommends. And again, all right, so I got the bolts out for the center section right here. Not too difficult. And this basically just slides out. There's a piece in here you have to be really careful of. It's this little bastard right here that goes in the center section there. It just falls out easily. And if you order a new center section, that's crazy, man. This thing is scratched up already. That is insanity. Oh boy. If you order a new center section, that piece will come with it, as will the center section bolts. But again, be very careful. You lose that, you're kind of screwed. All right, so the next thing we're going to get into is removing this gasket sealant. It's alive. Actually, it's not alive. It's dead. And I came across a mistake that I had made last time I had done this, and what I'm about to tell you should hopefully save you time, money, frustrations. So this is the center section, the brand new center section that I had replaced a couple of weeks ago. And as you can maybe see in this, it's already got scratches and grooves around it. $120. If I put this back into the unit the way that it is, it's going to have the same results. I'm going to be losing power because those grooves allow power loss. And the reason that those grooves got into that brand new center section is because of the pump motor section here. I'm not sure if you can see, there are grooves, especially in this area here, that I did not sand out properly the first time that I did this. So I'll show you how to do that sanding, and I'll do it properly this time. On to the actual removal of this gasket sealant. So I think the natural inclination is probably to use you know, a metal sort of razor blade, or you know, maybe a screwdriver or a metal scraping tool. But what I found ended up happening when I did that was it would actually mark and score this this die cast metal along here, which can cause you much sadness if you do that, because it can cause leaks in your unit, and you do not want that. So what I actually found to work better and not scratch the unit would be like a plastic scraping tool. These are actually from a laptop repair kit that I got, but I used these the first time that I did this repair, and they're pretty much whittled down to the nub, so not sure how well those are going to work. And something as simple as, you know, just one of these wire connectors, plastic wire connectors, as I started working on this, actually worked fairly well, and you know, plastic knife also worked. So again, this is one of those moments where you have to embrace the suck. This is a process. I'm going to say each half, it takes about an hour to clean this gasket sealant up pretty well. So, you know, say it with me, people. Taking a deep breath. Deep breath in, goose fraba, deep breath out, embrace the suck, and get ready for the fun of getting rid of that gasket sealant. Two other things I think you're going to find helpful to remove this gasket sealant would be to hit that biatch with some brake clean. Get you some brake clean, and then give her some shots of some brake clean there. And then a cloth to clean it up. I definitely recommend you use a cloth throughout this process. Like, do not use paper towels if you can avoid it. So here's one half the casing after I've cleaned it up. I'm pretty happy with it. I might work on this stuff up here a little bit more. There's still some crap I'm not real happy with there. Part of the challenge is, like, you would think Hydro Gear that built this thing would maybe try to smooth you know, their mold out a little bit there, because there's a lot of little rough pieces in here and some grooves and whatnot, so it tends to cause the gasket sealant to kind of stay in there. One thing I did learn this go around is that this brake clean will actually melt the plastic knife. So yeah, that's all sorts of fun. This probably took me all in maybe an hour. So next thing we're going to get into is the other half of this. And you have to be even more careful with this so as not to get pieces and particles in there. And I'll show you some things you can do to try to avoid that as well. So now on to this half of the unit, and just a little tip when you're trying to take off the gasket sealer from this piece, so as to avoid trying to get little shavings in there of this stuff. As you're scraping it, you know, kind of hold your finger, whatever, up against it that way to prevent those little rubber pieces from getting in there. Anyway, just kind of show you a little bit about what I'm talking about here as you're scraping this off, to try to prevent any of the old gasket sealant from getting into the unit. Like that. Yeah, fingernail works well too. Sometimes it's, you know, you don't need a complicated tool to get this stuff done. You want to make sure you get all the little rubbers, most of the little rubber pieces as you can, out of the screw holes. Alright, so I've got this half of the unit cleaned up, cleaned the gasket all up there. That took me, oh boy, that probably took me about an hour and 20 minutes. So we're probably, well, I don't know, 6 to 7 hours total time into this project. And the reason this one took me a little bit longer is because, you know, all these screw holes were filled with the gasket sealant. And there's a lot more sort of little things that you have to kind of get around here, and also trying to keep all the gasket particles, you know, out of the inside of the unit, because that will cause problems. Another little tip here, like I said earlier, you know, when this unit is sitting like this transaxle piece will actually slide up and down, and so when it slides up above the level of the unit here, it becomes harder, you know, to kind of put your finger in there and try to get the gasket material off. So what I would recommend to help with that is to, you know, maybe just get another block of wood or something to help lift the pressure off of that transaxle, so that this transaxle gear actually sits underneath the level of the unit. It's quite a bit easier than to get the gasket sealant off. All right, so the next thing we're going to get into is the actual trying to get the grooves out of this motor unit. Man, I really hope you can see that. It's kind of tough to see, but there are grooves here. There are actually some out here as well. So really important to sand those down. I'll show you how to do that. Now, you know, sort of professional machinists would tell you, hey, don't sand these things. You should take it to a machine shop and have them smooth it out. And you know what, they're probably right about that. If you have the ability to do that, and you know where to take that and have the time to do that and whatnot, then that's what I might recommend. But I'll show you, you know, sort of the home remedy to that. All right, so we're going to sand all the grooves out of this thing, or at least that's the intent. You want to make sure you get something that's flat. I think a piece of glass probably works the best. Natural inclination might be wood, but you really can't tell that that's perfectly flat. Glass is probably your best bet for that. Then you need a 600 grit sandpaper and a 320 grit sandpaper. You want to start with the 320. Put a little bit of oil on the pump, and then just keep going in a circular motion like this. Oil in there. Try to apply the pressure evenly. All right, so once you've got that sanded out, again, 320 first, 600 after that. That process probably took me 20-25 minutes or so. Next thing you want to do is just clean this up a little bit with some brake clean. And one thing I don't like about this stuff is the fact that it'll melt your fingers off, and it can tend to take some of this paint off of this motor as well, which I'm not real thrilled about, but it's not too bad. You really have to make sure this thing is clean, because remember, you just sanded this bitch down, and it's probably got you know, a bunch of little sandpaper particles on it, and if those get in your unit, that's not, you know, that's going to be a sad time for you after you did all that work putting it all back together. Anyway, I'm just going to make sure this thing is cleaned up, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like afterwards. Hopefully you can see the difference in the before and after sanding. All right, here is the pump side, El Pumpo. It's nice and shiny. All the grooves are out. Hopefully you can see that. As Deadpool would say, he's got a nice pair of smooth criminals down under. So we're going to get back into reassembling this transmission. All right, so what's next? Basically, you're just going to do everything you just did, and now you're going to do it in reverse. Yeah, so that's that easy peasy, and yeah, end of video. I wouldn't do that to you. So, all right, so about 8 to 9 hours into this project, prior to the reassemble. So we're going to get into this. So we have a bearing thrust here, and you can see that actually one of these plates is thicker than the other, and you'll see that on the service manual as well. It will highlight that. The thicker end, again, as long as you labeled what you took out in what step, then it shouldn't be an issue, but the thicker end goes up to the top. So here's what I found worked the first time I did this. Again, you're going to have to probably do this a bunch of times to get it right. Taking the pump, turning it over, putting it on top of the bearing thrusts while holding the pistons in, but they will fall out. That one just did. So then you have to do it all over again, which is fun and exciting. Again, this alone, I probably had to do 8, 9, 10 times the first time I did this. All right, so it took me about 6 tries, actually exactly 6 tries, to get the motor pump back in and seated on that ball bearing properly. Just make sure that, push down on it, make sure that the pistons are moving freely on the springs. Another little piece of that, see this little gap over here, piston can often fall in there, and then it feels like you have it seated properly, so just make sure you don't have a piston sitting in there. Again, otherwise that's going to ruin your transaxle if you put it together that way. Okay, the next part to this is putting the center section on. There's probably one right way to do this and a lot of wrong ways. So remember this little piece right here that likes to fall out. You need to make sure you have that in the center section. This little knobby here, you need to line up with, I think you see that there, this hole here, all while holding this little metal piece on and putting it up against your pump block or motor block or whatever that is. So my index finger doesn't fit, which seems more natural, so I'm using a different finger for that. You don't want to stick your finger in too far, because what happens is if it's in too far, that ends up hitting this piece here, and it doesn't allow you to put the center section on top. So I just put a little bit through the hole there and put some pressure on that little metal piece. Make sure that little metal piece doesn't fall out while sticking the center section into its mounting hole inside. Okay, pistons are still seem to be moving freely. I know my little metal piece in there, whatever that is, did not come out. Next thing I'm going to do is put the shaft in to make sure it's aligned properly and the pump piece is aligned properly with the center section. Remember, you got a washer, goes underneath the shaft. And you got a washer that goes on top of the shaft, which obviously you don't have to put on yet, but you can if you want. Stick that in there. It's not lined too well. Let's see. There it is. All right, there it is. So not too difficult. And in terms of doing this the right way, I actually did refer back to the Hydro Gear website again, just to see if there was an easier way to do this, and the easier way is the correct way. Once you have the center section piece and your shaft in, that's when you install the center section bolts. If you are reusing bolts from the old center section that you took out, which you shouldn't have to do because these bolts come with the center section replacement, you should get some thread locker. They already come with a thread locker from the manufacturer. Get some thread locker and put that on there. You're supposed to use an anaerobic thread locker for that. So that's what we're going to do next. And another important piece to this is that this is to be tightened down with a torque wrench to. All right, these center section bolts are actually supposed to be torqued down to 525 to 700 inch-pounds or pound inches, and you can convert that into foot-pounds if that's the kind of torque wrench you have, by simply dividing 12 into that number. That'll get you your foot-pounds. All right, the trusty dusty calculator says that 525 to 700 inch-pounds, pound inches is between 44, basically 44 and 58 foot-pounds or pound-feet. So that's what I'm going to do next, torque these bad boys down. Okay, well, worked up a sweat on that. So that's all torqued down. Center section is in. Next thing is to install this bad boy right here, whatever you call this, maybe another pump, I don't know, whatever it is. Make sure you've got your pistons springy and free. This piece right here goes down through the hole inside the casing. These little pistons will fall out through this hole, so you got to put some pressure on it while you fit the shaft inside the hole that it goes in. Like so. All right. So there we go. And then the next thing to do is to install the shaft that goes in there. I'll show you a little something here. Hopefully you can see it. Alright, well, not great. So you can see the little pistons in there. I mean, try to get those sort of as even as possible, like showing as evenly on all pistons as possible to be able to get that shaft in. If it's way off, then your shaft isn't going to go in, so trying to line that up and get those pistons you know, showing fairly evenly, let you know that you've got it, your holes lined up there through this piece in the center section. Right, so for this shaft we've got, again, this piece. Hopefully you didn't try to remove that because that's a pain in the butt, and it's not necessary. So we've got a washer that goes on, then we got the spring that goes onto that. There's a washer on top, which obviously you can put on afterwards. And then stick your shaft in. Right, so it should go in easily, and this one is not, which means that I'm going to have to fiddle with this block here and try to get it lined up a little. All right, so I kind of got that on the second or third try, it looks like. you know, you can kind of stick your fingers in here and mess with the pump, lift it up, try to get it looking even. Another thing you might want to try, I won't put anything metal in there. You might want to try like end of a pliers that's coated with plastic to maybe help you move that around. Anyway, again, a washer on top of the shaft, and then the spring, and then it just slides in like so, just like that, and that washer goes on, can't forget that. Right, and we're all springy and seems to be correct. Okay, as I'm looking over my parts list over here, looks like the next thing to do is to replace the gasket. Again, jacked the gasket up, jacked up the gasket when it was removed. Replace it with the correct gasket from your seal kit. Make sure there's no dirt on it. It just simply slides on there. Voila, fantastic. Then you need to put on the retaining ring, which again should have come with the seal kit. I'm probably just going to reuse this one. It still looks like it's in good condition. This one can be a little tricky because this thing is sort of spring loaded, and so basically it forces the gasket right up against level with the casing here. So there's no space to put this in, so you got to kind of press into the gasket and try to press this thing in all at the same time. All right, so I got that taken care of. As you can tell, I turned it over on its side. That made it a little bit easier to get that retaining clip in there. And let's see, next thing is this bypass rod. Dirt on it. I believe this only goes in correctly one way, and that is with this the half moon, the flat part right here, facing down. Sticks in there, and then it sticks through a hole in the center section, like so. Oh yay, then there's another retaining clip that needs to go on. This one doesn't look as challenging. Again, this is a retaining clip. It's probably in your seal kit. That one was simple. Then after that, we've got the bypass rod lever, and that again only fits on one way. I see the mark that I had put there previously lines up with the little arrow on the casing, so I know that's correct. Then you put on the retaining clip here. All right, so I have my little retaining clip on there, but it's not all the way down. Another little trick, get a socket that just fits over the shaft. Hammer it down like that. That way it'll go on evenly. No issues. Yeah, baby. So that should basically have a little bit of snap left, a little bit of snap right, just like that. All right, so back to the parts list. Oh, just for this next piece, again, you might want to get another little block of wood here that maybe you had one before that you'd used that I showed you earlier. Because you need to put this, make sure this gear is actually laying flat while you install the rest of this. And the way, again, the way it's sitting, it's putting pressure on the axle, which is pushing this gear up, which you don't want. So lift that up a bit. Stick that under there. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Get the pressure off. All right, so there's a washer that goes here. Dog hair, great. Washer. Shaft. More dog hair. Then this little gear here. Yay. Then this gear goes here. There we go. Come on. like that. This washer here on top there. Is that it for the inside? I think that's it. I think that's it for the gizmos on the inside. I have no other spare parts over here for internal stuff. Okay, so before you actually get into putting your gasket, liquid gasket on, you might want to dry fit this just to make sure that it seats properly. Well, yeah, so there you go. It's not seating properly. Okay, finally got this thing. So yes, the dry fit. What was causing the problem were these two little plugs over here not lining up with the holes on the casing. So just kind of get that in there. Again, this is just to make sure that it's everything's fitting properly before you put the sealant on, the gasket on, and then just make sure those holes line up with the plugs, like so. And there you go. All right, so here we have the Permatex Ultra Black, maximum oil resistant. If you're going to go with that, it certainly can't hurt. If you're not sure exactly where to put this liquid gasket, once again, on the Hydrogear website in the service manual, it actually shows you the outline of where the sealant goes. It's really not that complicated. Basically, you're just staying, in the line here between the inside of the unit and where the screw holes are. I might be a little bit heavier, sort of halfway down and on the bottom, because that's where, obviously your oil's more likely to sit for a majority of the time. So this fun process, here we go. Great. Yeah, you're supposed to do this in one continuous motion, but when there's air in this effing thing, that doesn't help. All right, so now I'm going to put all my screws in and torque those down. Again, the torque inch-pound is on the... So this is done. And now what we need to do, unfortunately, is wait at least 24 hours for this gasket to set and dry up and do its thing. one thing I do want to show you guys here is this screw right here is for the return to neutral. You just kind of tighten that up a bit. You can adjust it once you get it back onto the machine. If it's not returning back to neutral with your arm lever control sort of in the middle position, so you can make adjustments to that afterwards. You might need to adjust that just a little bit. Okay, so it's been 24 hours since I put the gasket on. That's the minimum wait time. As much as I'd like to wait 12 more hours just to be sure, feels like Christmas morning, and I want to open my present and make sure that it works. So a couple ways you can do this. The Hydrogear website says to put the transmission fluid in, again, 20W50 motor oil, in, and then install the transaxle, which is exactly what I'm going to do. You could, just for the sake of weight, you could install this first and then put the oil in. Problem with that is if you have any major leaks in your gasket, that's when you're going to find out, and then you're going to have to take it all out again, which would be no bueno. So again, 1.75 quarts go in. May the quarts be with you. So I'm going to use a funnel. You won't be able to get all 1.75 quarts in initially, and that is where this pump comes in. You need the pump once you get this mounted back onto the machine, because you can't get a funnel in there. You need the pump to do that. And you're going to have to put a little bit more of the motor oil in there after we purge the machine. All right, and like Jojo the Idiot Circus Boy, who told you that you're not going to be able to get all 1.75 quarts in, I tried to do that and failed, and a bunch of it came spewing back out. So I got about 8 ounces less than 1.75 quarts in there. So again, just be wary. Don't expect to get all 1.75 quarts in until you install this into the machine, and then you're going to purge and use the pump. All right, so now we're going to go through the process of reinstalling the transaxle back onto the machine. I'm not going to be wording on this because we've taken it off. It's really just doing everything in reverse, but I'm going to show you sort of how to do that all again. A couple of tips on this. So that fill plug, where are you? Right here, this fill plug. Don't tighten that down real tight. You really don't need to tighten it down real tight ever, because you're going to need to take that back off to put more fluid in it once you purge the air out of the unit, and it's real tough to kind of work inside there. It's real tight. Another thing I would recommend is up under here, to the area above where that fill hole is to wipe that down a little bit, because when you take that fill plug off and start working up in there, your fingers start hitting stuff, and if grass is falling inside the fill hole, you don't want that. All right, so check this out. I almost had 500 pounds of American steel, known as this entire lawnmower, just come down on me almost, trying to get the spring back on, right, with this thing. But check this out. So, you know, as you're pulling on this thing, this isn't real stable. This is going to shift. So, get this wrench here. I've shortened up the wire. I'm going to put the wrench on the widest setting possible. Stick the end of the wrench in here, like so, and then just pry on this bitch like such, right? And then it's just long enough to slide over and fit in. There she blows. All right, once you have your spring, dry belt spring back on there, just check the dry belt. Make sure it's around well, it's 4 pulleys. There's 3 pulleys that it should be around. 1 for each transmission. 1 on the upper pulley for the PTO clutch. And then obviously up against the spring-loaded pulley here. Just make sure that it's seated properly, because we're actually going to start moving this thing around. Jingly jingly, we got some keys. We're getting ready to fire it up. So now what we're going to do is the purge procedure. You're going to purge all the air out of the transmission. If you have air pockets in your transmission, you're going to lose power. So first thing you want to do is this black rod here. You want to pull it through the other side of the hole there. So the position it's probably in now is the position as if you were running the lawnmower and cutting the grass. You have to pull it all the way on the other side of this hole. Make sure it latches forward. Okay, and what's going to happen is as we purge this for the first procedure, it won't allow the transaxle to move. At this point forward, we're going to find out whether or not this was successful or we completely messed it up. So start the lawnmower, and you want to move the handle forward and backward slowly, about 5 or 6 times in each position. Throttle it up to where you would normally cut the grass, whatever level that's going to be, and then again move this back and forth 5 or 6 times forward, 5 or 6 times back fairly slowly. Alright, so that was successful. Nothing crazy thus far. Now what you're going to do is you're going to return this transmission bypass rod here, the black rod, back to the back position as it would normally be as if you were getting ready to cut the grass. And then you're going to do the same thing. Slowly forward 5 times, back 5 times, forward 5 times. And again, you only have to use the lever that you've replaced the transmission for. All right, moment of truth. So that was successful, but we're not completely done here. Can't celebrate quite yet. So the next thing we're going to do is that's hopefully removed all the air out of the transmission, and now you're going to put the remaining however many ounces of motor oil into the transmission. So you need to remove that plug, and then use your pump and your oil, and put whatever you have left to hit your 1.75 quarts. All right, next thing we're going to do is put the tire back on, and then take this thing for a little test drive without the deck on. Works like new, biatches! Yeah, and good luck with yours. I know you can do it. Patience, persistence, You'll be all good.
Okay, so 3 websites that I mentioned that I was going to show you. One is Cub Cadet website. It's www.cubcadet.com. Once you're in there, go to Service and Parts, and then from there, under the Don't Know Part Number, enter the model number. Enter the model number of your lawnmower, and that is typically found underneath the seat. And then go to Diagrams. Make sure that you select the proper diagram for your model and year. Mine was a 2011. And then from there, on the drop-down menu, go to all the way down at the bottom. Either be for the left half transmission or right half transmission. Mine was the left. And then in there, you can zoom in and zoom out on this diagram. It might be helpful for you to actually try to copy the image or print that diagram or save it, so you can kind of blow it up. It's a little sketchy here when you try to zoom in. It's tough to see sometimes. So there are 2 to 3 things that you're really looking for on here that are the most common causes. The first one is close to the bottom here. It is the seal kit. And seal kit is currently $43. And then from there, we're looking for the center section. Center section, here we go. Center section dash filter. That's currently $143. And then towards the top, we're looking for the motor block assembly. That's the one that you have to sand down. So for the motor block assembly, again, either sand it or order a new one. Completely up to you. Again, it's currently about $120. Just one other thing on this, like over here on the left-hand side are the Cub Cadet part numbers. So if you go to order that on another website, these numbers may come in handy for you. Let's go to partstree.com. And then similarly, you can enter your information here. You can search by brand. You can type in the actual part number in here off the Cub Cadet website. The parts on here are oftentimes, a few cents to a couple dollars cheaper, and Partstree, though they do charge you like $8 to ship, will often have it there within typically 2 to 4 days. Okay, and I believe there's one other website I was going to show you. All right, so another helpful website I wanted to show you was the Hydro Gear website. It's www.hydrogear.com. Actually, it's hydro-gear.com. And he wants service and repair manuals. And from there, under support, service and repair manuals. And then what you're looking for is, believe it or not, it's not transmissions. It's what you think it would be, but it's actually transaxles. And then they have all the different models of transaxles there. The one that I was working on is the EZT 2200. Click on that. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So there it is. It gives pretty much all the information you're going to need to complete this rebuild. Just a couple of things I want to show you. Here it mentions the actual oil that you put in, how many ounces or quarts. It does go through the purging procedure as well. This is where it has a list of the tools that it says you're going to need right here.
This is where it has the different torques that that they're supposed to be set at. And yeah, that's about it. Now, the first X amount of pages, I don't know, 19, 20 pages, are actually the EZT 2200. And then the last, 20 pages or whatever it is are for the EZT 2100. So anyway, there you have it. I hope you find those 3 websites helpful. And good luck.